Hello, my name is Sarah from Tall Tales Mysteries, and welcome to Mugshots, where today I am speaking to author Bud Craig. Before we go any further, if you want to find any of Bud's books, you'll find them down here underneath the videos. Please do click and get to know him and his books. Now, we're obviously going to have a chat with Bud about his work and how he got started and what have you. But the big thing that we're going to ask Bud about today is sense of place. And he's going to explain why he chose the setting for his books and then hopefully help us find the right setting for our books as well. No pressure there, Bud. So it's lovely to see you.
I'll pretend to be an expert. Sorry.
Well, you're already published, so you're ahead of me, and no doubt many others as well. So welcome to Mugshots. Would you like to tell me, first of all, about the books that you have written?
Right. Most of my books, I mean, they're all are mostly in the crime genre. And most of them are set in Salford, where I was born and bred. And that's interesting for me because I actually live in a village near Darlington. I've lived in the same house for 46 years. So I don't know modern Salford that well, so I've had to find things out. And that's been an interesting experience. The main character is called Gus Keane. He's a social worker who's just got early retirement in the first book, and he becomes a private investigator. And he also used to play rugby league for Salford. And those things came about in a variety of ways. The setting was because I'm from there, and I started some of the work on this years ago. The character, I used to be a social worker, and I often thought a social worker would be a good person to investigate crime. And I hope anyone who reads my books will agree. Also, the rugby league is from my family, really. My dad was a massive rugby league fan, and he took us to a few matches for Salford, and he also took us to both Old Traffords, football and cricket. So all of that was a strong part of my background, and Gus is very keen on sport, amongst other things. And that's in the background a bit, I suppose you'd say.
So you are writing about what you know then?
Yes, to a large extent. You know, even the social work, I couldn't say I was bang up to date, but I think the basic problems that social workers deal with hasn't changed at all. And it's a good place to have crime, because a lot of damaged people are the people we try to help. And also, in a work environment, you've got the usual, office politics, people having affairs, all that stuff, which adds interest. I mean, until I started with social services back in the 70s, I'd never come across anyone having an affair. And it soon turned out that if you weren't having an affair, there was something wrong with you. So there's something wrong with me, I hasten to add, if you follow that logic. So there's all sorts of, all human life is there, really. And you're dealing with, people with addictions, violent people. And, all that is a good background, I think, for a crime novel.
So when did you write the first of your books then?
Well, the first one is called Tackling Death. Tackling is a pun on tackling in rugby.
Yeah.
And it was published in 2013. And I'd been working quite seriously on it for maybe 5 or 6 years. But some of the ideas in it go back 20 years and more, because I never throw anything away. I can't abide waste. And you think, I always thought that the novel was a good idea. The plot was a good idea and all that. But I soon realised that a lot of it was complete rubbish. And I had to work quite ruthlessly on it and pare it down, edit it very carefully. And I eventually sent it to the book folks. And I thought, well, I may as well send it here. You know, they're going to turn it down, but so what? Doesn't cost me anything. And it was interesting how I found out, because my wife and I were on our way back from a pretty disastrous holiday in Devon, where it rained all the time. Half of us were ill. And we left a bit early, and we stopped in this posh hotel in the Cotswolds, thought we'd treat ourselves. And I hadn't been able to get emails all the time. I'd been in this place in Devon, in Ilfracombe it was. I wouldn't recommend it. That's probably unfair, but never mind. And so I got to this email from the book folks, and he said something like, "Thank you for sending your novel. I'm pleased to say we're interested in publishing it." And I'd read it wrong. I thought, oh well, another rejection. And then I thought, hang on a minute, what did he say? And there I was. And then I got up and started walking around the room. I couldn't keep still. And so it's a mixture of disbelief and excitement that I was going to get a novel published. And it went on from there. So that was the first one.
So were they the first people that you'd sent it to?
Oh no, I'd sent it to quite a few people by then. I mean, you'd be very lucky just to send it off and get accepted straight away. Some
That's
people
what I
do.
was thinking.
Yeah, some people do, and they make me sick. That's a joke, by the way.
Yes, of course.
So yeah, so I honestly thought, I must say, when I said that's right, this is the last place I'm going to send it. If people don't want to publish it, fine, life goes on. So it was quite lucky.
Oh wow! And so, how many have you written since then?
Well, I've got a list here just in case I forget. There's Tackling Death, Dead Certainty, Falling Foul. They were the first 3 Gus Keane books. There's a Gus Keane trilogy, which I think has sold better than any of the others. And then because I'd been ill for quite a while and didn't have the time or energy to write a novel, I asked my publisher if I wanted to publish a book of my short stories, and they very kindly agreed, because short stories apparently don't sell that well. But that's called high profile. Most of the stories in it I've called them award-winning. They did particularly well in a lot of competitions, won, got placed, shortlisted, etc. And I am quite proud of that. And so that was the next book. Then the next one is called A Dangerous Time, and that's set in a fictional place called Lovendale in the northeast of England. It's an area of outstanding natural beauty, and that's a crime book as well. And then I got back to Gus Keane, and the last 2 have been Making a Killing and Stealing Time. So that's my books up to date. And I'm working on another one now, which will be a bit different. It's set in Greater Manchester still, but it's inspired by a short story I wrote called Marching On, which is set at the time of the Munich air crash and the 50th anniversary of the crash. And I often thought it would be interesting to expand on that. So that's how this latest novel started.
Right. Okay. Fantastic. So you're actually a perfect person to speak to about sense of place, by the sounds of it, because you obviously...
Wait till I've finished before you say that.
Well, I'm really interested actually, because you've chosen to set your Gus Keane novels in Manchester, in Salford. Slap my wrist, I shouldn't have said that, should I? But then you've also created a fictional place, Lovendale, as well. So actually you can see it coming from 2 different points of view, because I know some authors I read set things in completely fictitious towns and areas, whereas others choose to go for something that is real. Do you have a preference?
Well, I think the fictional places are easier in some ways because you don't have to worry about accuracy, and no one's going to complain that you've got a street name wrong, or he's gone the wrong route to get to wherever he's going, and all that sort of thing. And it gives you more freedom, you know, in terms of the geography of the place, names of different places. But I think nearly everything anybody writes is based on reality anyway. Lovendale is very loosely based on the Yorkshire Dales. And I have that in my mind I had that in my mind when I was writing it and when I was describing places. Also, the main town called Lovington is, I suppose, a bit of a cross between Darlington and Barnard Castle, Dominic Cummings' favourite place. And so it's easier if you've got something in your head to picture, I think anyway, right. Even if you're writing about a fictional place.
Do you, if you're writing about a fictional place, do you almost draw a map of that fictional place so that you don't make the mistake of moving, I don't know, a police station or an office somewhere?
Yeah, I referred to maps. I mean, I looked at a map of Swaledale, for example, which is one of my favourite places, to see, you know, what the whole dale might look like. And that helped me to work out, you know, where places were in relation to one another and all that. So, I mean, the book starts with somebody doing the Lovendale Way, so it's a long distance walk. So that takes the reader into the valley straight away. And the main characters, Kate, has just come up from London. And as a lot of people from the south do, when they arrive in the northeast, they walk around looking glamorous because they can't believe how beautiful it is. And we keep that quiet so we don't get overrun, I think.
Don't keep telling people.
Well, I think we should tell people how nice it is to help the tourist industry, apart from anything else, after the pandemic, if it ever comes to an end, of course.
Yeah.
But all those things, I suppose you could say with Salford, I do know where places are. I did have to look certain things up because it's so long since I lived there. And Gus, although he's quite a bit younger than me, he's seen all these changes, and at times he finds it hard to cope with that.
Right.
But he's lived there all his life, and the big thing about Salford for Gus is it's home. It's where he's from. It's part of his identity. He goes to other places. He likes other places, but he always wants to come back home.
Mm.
And I think with sense of place, it's important how the characters feel about the place. Certainly with Gus, I thought that was a big factor. And it's a working class city, and it gets labelled as being rough, you know, and they're all criminals over there and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Which is very unfair because most people are just trying to get by like anybody else.
Yeah.
And if you think of history, industrial history, etc., a lot of the working people in Salford made this country, and that I often feel that's not recognised. And Gus is very loyal to Salford. He defends people from attack who are being attacked unfairly. So that was all part of the place. I tend to go through characters. I should mention John Dean, who I think you know, who's helped me a lot with my writing. And he was brilliant on sense of place because he says once he finds a place, he can get the story going. think I normally start with characters, so I had to think about sense of place and also what does the place mean to the characters. And I find that easier to get into the whole thing.
Do you sort of approach a place where you're setting your novel almost as though it's another character then?
Not quite, no. I think I've read books where that's clearly the author's intention. I think it's more a background thing. It's got quite a strong presence, but I'm not sure whether I'd say it was another character. We've been watching Foyle's War during the lockdown, which I think is the best detective series ever. And that makes you realise how important sense of place is, because there are two backdrops, if you like. One is the war, the Second World War, and the other is the town of Hastings, which is on the south coast at a time when everybody was frightened there'll be a German invasion any time. And so that gives it an extra dimension. And if you see the town on the TV show, you'll know it's got lots of nooks and crannies and passageways where people can get murdered or the baddies can run away and all that sort of thing. I've only ever been to Hastings once, and that was a long, long time ago.
I lived there for a lot of years.
Did you?
Yeah, so I know it quite well, yeah.
Yeah, it's a beautiful part of the world, really, but it's a long way from home for us.
So with when you're trying to build up a sense of place then, how much time do you spend? It sounds as though your character, you're almost looking through your character's eyes at the city or the Yorkshire Dales. How much time do you spend setting that scene and researching it as well?
I do a bit of research, but I had to do more in Salford. I very rarely visit Salford now. My sister lives in that area, a place called Astley near Lee, but it doesn't entail me going to Salford to see her. And the research, I think, was to get up-to-date information about Salford, about the road systems, the motorways, because every time we go over there seems to be another motorway, and we'll change the name of it, something like that. For the Lovendale one, I don't think I did a lot of research. I think it's something I've built up over the years. It goes back to a number of short stories I've written. Most of them are set either in Salford or in Lovendale. I mean, one is actually set on a distant planet as well, and another one is set in Memphis, Tennessee. The Memphis, Tennessee one's been my most successful short story as well. But apart from that, it's mainly those two places. And Lovendale has built up through these short stories and what it looks like, how beautiful the countryside is. A lot of the description in A Dangerous Time is pinched from one or two short stories. So that was already written for me, and I had an idea what it looked like. Also, just from places I visited, I could base things on. So I tend not to do a lot of research for my stories. There's a couple of chapters in one of the Gus Keane books, which is a flashback to 1974. I did a little bit of research on that, but mostly was looking at old photographs of me wearing flares and having long hair and all that. So that was easy enough. And interesting things happened in 1974. I think that was the year of Watergate, and Manchester United were relegated, and Salford were the best rugby league team in the country, which is hard to believe now. So, but as I say, apart from that, I don't do a vast amount of research.
So, if a writer were to come to you and say, or someone who was writing their first novel were to come to you and say, well, I've got this story and the story is great, but it's lacking something. how would you help them build the sense of place? What tips would you give them where that was concerned?
Well, I think they've got to decide first of all, where are you going to set it and why? Is it a place you know that you're familiar with? And the idea of writing what you know is partly because it's easier. You don't have to think about it too much, but you still all the principles of writing still apply. And I think I would say, is it a place you know? How do you feel about it? Do you like it? Have you had bad experiences there? How does the character feel about it? Because we can be very ambivalent about places we live or where we come from. The main character could have been completely alienated from. I know a friend of ours who's from Darlington, and she absolutely hates it because of the bad experiences she had. And it doesn't make sense really, because the bad experiences would have happened anyway. But you can understand somebody feeling like that. Others may have had an idyllic childhood and want to come back, So I think that coming at it from characters like I do, I think I will concentrate on that. But also, what does the place look like? Is it a place with a lot of poverty? Is it a well-to-do place? Are most of the people middle class or whatever? What sort of jobs do people have? Like in Darlington, for example, I think we're mainly working for the council or working for Orange. It's not called Orange now. EE, is it?
Yes.
The mobile phone. I would imagine between them they employ possibly a majority of the people. So things like that, or little details, help to build it up.
So to choose a place then that you're going to set your novel in, I guess it's probably actually easiest to set it somewhere close to you, so that at least you can go and visit and do any research that you need to and get a feel for the place.
Yeah, I think so. Again, you could argue you don't want to be too close to it. You want to have an objectivity about it. But going to visit the place, I think that's a good idea. So setting a novel in London, although I have lived in London, would be difficult for me. Or anywhere far away, Bristol, Cornwall, whatever. Yeah, I think on the whole, if you can visit the place and it's nearby, or you know someone who lives there, something like that would help, I think. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then it is, I suppose, very much, as you say, through the characters' experiences as to what they see and what they tell us about the place.
Yeah, I think so. Although it will be a biased view, but then a novel is a biased piece of work. It's coming from someone's point of view, someone's experiences, and it's really about saying that sense of place or a setting is only part of it. Everything has got to work. It's got to be you're still telling a story. You've got to have a strong plot which makes people want to read on. Also, you want them to engage with the characters. And some readers will say, oh, I'm very much influenced by where the book's set. If they find a book that's set in, I don't know, Istanbul or whatever, and they've had a good holiday there, they might want to read that one. I don't think that would be enough for me. I think I'd want more than that. And more story and characters, I think, as a reader as well.
It is very interesting, isn't it? Because there are lots of writers who, if you say their name, they will immediately say, oh, yes, that's set in. So if you spoke about Colin Dexter, that's Oxford.
Yeah.
If you mention Peter James, well, that's Brighton. And So there are lots of writers who do it incredibly successfully, set their
Yeah.
novels in
Oh, yeah.
in a real place.
Oh, yeah. Well, Rebus in Edinburgh, that's another one.
Of
That's
course.
very much part of the setting.
Yeah.
And you couldn't imagine him anywhere else.
No. No. Do you have anyone in particular that you love to read who do create a sense of place brilliantly? Obviously, other than Rebus and Ian Rankin.
Yeah, well, coming back to John Dean, his novels are set in fictitious northern towns. You're never quite sure which bit of the north it is, because the north's a big place. But there's a definite, I don't know, I hate to use the word grittiness, and with the Jack Harris books, there's very close affinity between Jack and the Hills. I mean, he comes across as a sort of bloke who doesn't really like people that much. He wants to get away to remote areas with his dog. And as I'm not a dog lover, I'm not sure about that. But certainly the sense of place is very strong in both the series that John writes about.
Yeah.
And I think he will tell you, he was telling me about one of his books. I apologise, I can't remember the title, but where he said he'd be, I think it's the Isle of Man he'd been to, and they were walking through this place, and he thought this would be a great opening scene for a novel. Excuse me.
Right. Okay. Well, yes. So yes, I have read some of John's books, and I know exactly what you mean, because you do feel as he does describe it so well, but without feeling as though it's pages and pages of describing where it's set. Yeah.
You've got to be careful about not to put too much description in.
Yeah. Can you overdo that then?
I think so, yes. There has to be some, because it would be, quite empty without some descriptions of people, the places, the scenery, if it's in the country or the seaside. But you don't want to be slowing the story down too much. I think I keep telling myself, you're writing the bloody story, get on with it. And I think that's one of the good things about crime, that you're constantly being reminded that you've got to tell the story.
Yeah. So when you, I'm interested now, you're talking about telling the story. How long does it take you to write, say, a Gus Keane novel?
Well, as I said with the first one, I worked on that for a long time. The next one I'd written within a year.
Right.
Now, this is slightly complicated. I don't want to depress people, but I've had some health problems which slowed me down quite a bit, because I was spending a lot of time at medical appointments, and didn't have as much energy. So that's why I asked for the short stories to be published. So I'm not sure I could give you a typical sort of answer, but I would have thought some people write 2 or 3 books a year. I know I couldn't do that. I would say if I've done it within a year and maybe 9 months, I'd be happy.
Yeah.
Although apparently the market would demand a bit more than that from me.
Really? Right.
Well,
I find it amazing.
Yeah. I don't know if that's correct, but I think one thing that was said to me, that repetition was mentioned, that if you've got a series, you want to get the next book out quickly, so people don't forget about you. Someone else will take your place.
Yeah. No, yes, I can see that. I find it amazing when I hear that people can write, 2 or 3 books a year. I'm always very impressed.
Yeah. Well, I am, but I just wonder what else they do.
Yeah. That's a good point. Do you have a routine? Yes,
sorry,
there is.
Do I have a routine? I wish. Yeah, I try to have a routine. I try to set aside the morning, certainly,
Right.
to do some writing. And sometimes it's a few hours a day, sometimes it's less. I don't have a strict routine partly because there are other things in my life. I mean, we manage to see our family a bit more now because because of lockdown, etc. It's been more difficult, but I think I'm very strongly committed to my family, my children who are now not children, and grandchildren. I think that's an important factor in my life, and hopefully in the not too distant future may have the odd holiday.
Yes.
So we're
Wouldn't that
really
be
looking
nice?
forward to that.
Yeah.
So
So
you know,
I'm
different thing. I mean, if there's sport on the telly, it's a bit of a pull. I must try and resist. I've been watching the snooker this week. But, I try to ration myself so I can get on with the writing.
yes, but you do have to have a bit of real life in there in order to draw
Yeah.
inspiration, surely.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So yeah, right. Okay. Now, as you know, I always ask our authors if you can give us a few tips for those of us who are just starting out or perhaps have just finished a book and are sending it off to agents. Do you have any suggestions and advice for?
Well, I'm going to say something you told me not to, but just write. If you want to write, you write. You sit down and write. You don't wait for inspiration, and you don't mess about. You've got to get on with it. And even if what you've written isn't very good, well, everybody has to edit their work. But one of the phrases I've come across, which I think is quite good, is don't get it right, get it written.
Yeah.
So you have to get it right eventually, but you will not get it right first time unless you're a genius. And there's not many of them about. So sit down, write, and then look at it again and think, well, who wrote this crap? Well, you might think, well, it's not too bad, just needs a few changes. And so that's important. That really gets onto the question of editing. You need to edit your work quite ruthlessly. Don't leave stuff in because you think it looks quite good, or don't necessarily stick in something from your own life which doesn't really fit the story. Sometimes you can use what's happened to yourself, but you have to be very careful about that. Let's think, what else could there be?
Well, just sticking with the editing. I mean, obviously, we can all have a go at editing our work, and those of you who have got a publisher, there is an editor who will obviously go over your work as well. But for those of us who haven't got a publisher and have finished a manuscript and think we've edited it sufficiently, would you recommend finding an editor to look at it and cast an eye over? What would you do in that situation?
Well, you could. There are various organisations that will read your book for a fee and give you feedback, but it is expensive. You've got to bear that in mind. I did send one of my books off well before I was published to a consultancy of some sort, and what they said was perfectly right, and it was, but it was a bit disheartening. But when I thought about it afterward, I thought, well, look, what I'm going to have to do with this is go right back to the beginning and be ruthless and cut stuff out and tell the story and focus on telling the story, and the other stuff has to fit in around that. So with Eric from the Book Folks, who's a very supportive publisher and editor, when my first book was published, I was thinking, great, yeah. And then he told me all the things that were wrong with it. So I thought, right. The most annoying thing was he was right. So I had to change one or two, nothing drastic. I had to change a few things, which really improved it no end. And all the other books have been the same. It's quite a salutary experience, somebody going through your work, which you put so much effort into, and in some ways finding fault with it. That's the one way of looking at it. But another way of looking at it is finding ways to make it better. So you've got to be positive with this. I think once you have had a few things published, you're a bit more confident about things like that. You're quite willing to listen to what people say.
Mm-hmm. So do you have quite a lot of work to do in the old editing stage then?
Yeah, every now and again I will print stuff off. I'm so old-fashioned, I still print stuff off and I'd look through it and cross things out, change things. That's before the novel's finished. I will do a lot of editing, and I will think what needs to be changed to bring everything together.
Yeah.
Don't know if I'm making sense, to make it a cohesive whole. And something that happened in chapter 3 might be vital when you get to chapter 16, and you've got to be juggling those balls in your head all the time.
It's very interesting, because one thing I was told was not to go back and start editing even when before I've actually finished the whole thing. But by the sounds of it, you do.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do. I went to a talk by a writer called Anna Ralph, who's the daughter of Pat Barker, the Booker Prize winner. And I'm a big fan of Pat Barker, but Anna Ralph's 2 books were brilliant, I thought. But she was saying her mother would just sit down in front of a screen and write the book, which I find almost impossible to believe. But, she's won the Booker Prize. I don't think I ever will. And everybody does it differently. That's another thing. You can lay down general bits of advice. Everybody does it differently. I have to write something before I can say I've started the novel, even if it may be cut out, it may change dramatically. I may start somewhere else, all that sort of thing. But I have to get writing, write maybe a chapter or a couple of chapters, whatever it may be, and then look at it. And that process goes on, writing, planning, and so on. And I give sections to my wife to have a look at. And the first part of the book I'm on now, I showed her one version and then worked on it. And the other version, she thought the other version was better, that I had improved it because I'd thought more deeply about it, but I had to have something in my hand to look at. Yeah. To trigger those thoughts and thinking, well, hang on a minute, we need a character there, or we need something else to build up to this scene. It's too early in the book and things like that.
Right. Yeah. So you move things about as well.
Yeah. Not so much now, but I remember the first book. I got things in the wrong order where it wouldn't make sense. So, and Anne, my wife, the important thing she does when she asks questions about what's happening, and it's obviously not clear what's happening, I know I've got to do some more work on that.
That's really good, isn't it? So would you recommend having a group of people who, mind you, she could, you're married, I mean, it could ruin your relationship, couldn't it? But would you recommend having a group?
We can't afford a divorce. So.
Would you recommend having a group of people that would read your book?
I've never done that. I mean, I belong to a book called The Incas. It started out as the Inkerman Writers, and coming up to John Dean again. He was a tutor on writing classes. Some of us went to for many years. Then John moved to Scotland, and
very inconsiderate.
It was, yeah. Never forgiven him. Although he's a cricket fan, so he must be all right. But where was I? Yes, we set up this thing called I think they're called the Incas something or other, and we get together and we do give each other feedback, but we're fairly polite. And to be honest, the talent in that group is amazing. I keep telling people to send their stuff off somewhere, because there's only about 3 or 4 of us who've tried to get anything published, which I find hard to understand. But anyway, that's up to them. But it does help. It stimulates ideas. I think I told you I've recently had a short story commended in a competition, and I wrote that during the Incas sessions, or got the ideas through the Incas sessions.
Right.
And, because I think you do need some stimulation. You need to talk to other writers, because someone who doesn't write, maybe they find it too hard to understand what you're doing, why you're doing this. I remember hearing Paul McCartney say when he met people when he was a teenager, they'd say, "What do you do in your spare time?" And he'd say, "Oh, well, I write songs." And they'd all look at him, "Oh, that's nice." And then he met John Lennon, and John Lennon said, "Oh, I write songs as well." And the rest is history, to use an awful cliche. But talking to people who like writing and want to develop their writing, that's great, really.
Yeah. So find like-minded people, I suppose. Find
I think so. Yeah. You wouldn't necessarily ask them to read your whole novel. I think that's a bit much to ask of people. But I think if you're really going to get it analysed by somebody, you're going to have to pay. I think that's the top and bottom of it.
Right. So I think I threw you off course a little bit there. So you were giving us different tips, and then I moved on from there about the editing. You were about to suggest something else, I think, as a good tip.
Well, I think it's a good idea to leave your work aside. If whatever you're writing, a short story, novel, play, leave it aside for a while. Maybe some people say a month. I think that's a bit of a long time. It could either be a few days or maybe a week. And while you're waiting, things will go on in your subconscious, and you'll start thinking, "Oh no, I'm not sure about that bit. What if I should have changed it?" Then you go back to it fresh, and you may still think it's not very good, really, or sometimes you think, well, it's not too bad. It's coming on. It does need a bit more work, but I'm getting there. I think that's how you finally reach the end, because you couldn't mess on with a book or a story forever without saying, right, that's it, it's finished.
Yeah. So do you just reach a point where you say, "Do you know, I've had enough, that's it, done"?
Yeah, to an extent. You think, well, that's as good as it's gonna get. I mean, if you've got a publisher, they will maybe make further suggestions, but I think you do get to the point where you've got no more ideas. That's it. That's good enough. And sometimes you may think it's pretty good, whatever. I think you've got to be positive about your work, but you've also got to be very self-critical.
Yes. Yeah. Right. That's brilliant. Lovely. Well, thank you very much indeed for joining us, Bud. It's been fantastic to speak to you and learn about your books, and learn so much about your ideas around sense of place as well. So that's been marvelous. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much for asking me. It's given me the chance to talk about my 2 favorite subjects, myself and my writing. But I think people say I'm quiet, but if you set me off on my writing and I've got an interested audience, it's hard to shut me up, as you probably realised. But thank you very much. Yeah, really enjoyed it.
It's been lovely to speak to you. And as I say, if you want to find more about the Gus Keane books and the Lovedale books, down here you'll find all the links to the books, and you may very well want to order them and read them. I hope you will. So thank you again.
Thank you. Goodbye.